welcome to another episode of the Who Dat Jedi podcast, and this is another quarantine edition. So we got all of us on a video chat recording this, and we've got a special. First of all, joining me as always is Fredo and Dave. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
There you go. And we have a special guest, somebody we talked about actually on the podcast before. We keep saying we're going to get him in to talk about the Rise of Skywalker. But that's not tonight. But we got Scott Colesby joining us. So
hello.
And so we got Uptown, Mid-City, Metairie, and Gentilly all taken care of. So and all points in between. So big news. There's really no Star Wars news, coming. But it's a good thing we're recording this right now because we got now a tropical storm coming. So what else can 2020 throw us? And by the way, how do we pronounce this? I've heard
Cristobal.
Is that serious, or are you just making that up?
No, it's the name of the storm. It's Tropical Storm Cristobal.
Well, I know, but how do you pronounce it? Because I've heard several different pronunciations of this. Like anything from like crystal ball. I keep thinking the Styx song, It's people. You watch the news. People are pronouncing it 8 different ways.
Oh my gosh! It didn't even dawn on me until you just said crystal ball.
Yeah.
No, it's like think Christopher, but instead of the fur at the end, just say ball, B-A-L. But don't lean into the L too much.
Cristobal. I don't know why. It just makes me think of the Oregon head coach, Mario Cristobal.
Perfect. That's it.
Right?
I'm thinking the Styx song. So I think when it's raining 10 inches this weekend, I'm just going to come up with alternate lyrics. So
I mean, that's really the big thing is like, when is the deluge of rain coming so I know when to move my car?
Yeah, no kidding. So anyway, so that's, like I said, it's funny. I told a friend of mine in Nebraska, I said, yeah, Brittany's out getting, tropical storm supplies. And he's like, what? I was like, yeah, it's, locusts, plague, storms,
super
riots,
volcano.
So
well, everybody forgot murder beast for a while.
Oh, that's right, murder hornets. Yep.
Isn't there also an asteroid that's going to pass really close to us?
Yeah, I think that's tonight.
Oh, awesome! So
this might be the last episode of the Who Dat Jedi podcast. Glad you could join us for such an auspicious occasion. But there's not a lot happening in Star Wars land. But tonight, what we're going to be doing, I've completed my homework. Several weeks ago, one of the first podcasts we talked about, and just McClunky this. Aaron hasn't seen. There's several, movies that Aaron hasn't. Every time something comes up, like Aaron hasn't seen Goonies, and I get yelled at by everybody around me because I haven't. But the Marvel movies were ones that I just never really. I had nothing against them. I just was never driven to go see them. And so Dave and Fredo made a list of the list of movies that I needed to see, and so Brittany and I, during this whole quarantine, have been just watching Marvel movie after Marvel movie. And tonight we're going to be discussing. We're going to go around the horn because, first of all, obviously Dave and Fredo had seen him, and Scott is a big MCU fan. That's why we brought him in, because we wanted more people to yell at me when I asked dumb questions. So for entertainment, But anyway, but we will start off as normal with our Star Wars trivia. So I will grab cards. And I don't cheat when I give myself the question, Scott, so not have to worry. So let's start with Fredo. What's your favorite color, Fredo?
Blue. No, red.
Well played. Well played. All right.
This is the right audience for that joke.
Actually, one of my Facebook memories today was I took the time to post. I said, "Have you guys ever heard of the Monty Python Holy Grail Ale?"
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I've had it.
Yeah.
I actually bought a 6-pack of that like probably 7 years ago, and so it was a really cool bottle, but it was very disappointing as a beer. So anyway, All right. So Red then. All right. Who strikes the first blow during the lightsaber duel in Cloud City?
That would be Luke Skywalker.
That would be Luke Skywalker. Fredo gets a gold star for the day. All right.
Yay!
There were only 2 blows struck, right?
Yeah, it's a 50-50 shot there.
Well, no, but I just, it's either who swings first? Luke swings first or Vader swings first? And I think we all know it was Luke going first. So,
Well, and of course it was I guess who swung first? That's one thing, but it's who hit first. Yeah, it was
Who hit
Vader's
first.
shoulder. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, all right. So Scott, on to you. All right. Here we go. It's a prequel trilogy one. What planet does General Grievous recommend to the Separatist Council as a safe haven?
Oh, I have no idea. that is my least watched, I think, of the prequels.
That is a question we can't ask you. That okay? So it's which? So is it your least favorite, Episode 3?
Not my least favorite, but I think it was the one I'd finally given up for a while.
Because I've actually been I've said Episode 3 is not my favorite, and these guys are like all about the music in it and everything. So we might have to have a watch party at some point. All right. Well, it was Mustafar. So, which we won't go any further into that because we'll start talking about Rise of Skywalker, and we want to keep Scott calm. All right. So, Dave. All right. What 3 words of advice does Luke give C-3PO before leaving to rescue Leia from the Death Star's prison? 3 words.
dude.
Yeah, man. Lock the door.
There you go. It is lock the door. Yep. All right. And for myself, what sound adds to Chewbacca's discomfort while he's cooped up in a Cloud City detention cell? It's like a siren. It's an alarm. A siren, right? A siren. Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. We didn't really wait for our audience to answer the question, but that's all right. They can pause. So there we go.
Smart.
We got our Star Wars out of the way. So let's talk. Well, first of all, I guess let's ask Scott though a Star Wars question. Let's just say, what is your favorite Star Wars movie of the bunch?
Probably Empire. It's always Empire. But Last Jedi does come to a close second now.
So why is Empire? Is it just because everybody thinks that Empire is awesome?
No, it covers the most of the sort of there's the theory in filmmaking of Meanwhile Back at the Farm, and it covers multiple stories all at once that end up converging together the best to me.
So this seems like a setup question, but as you're answering this, I will say this. Because we talked about it in a previous episode, Empire, Star Wars got the sequel, how to do a sequel correct. Because, and it's one of my criticisms, and this is the first time you guys can yell at me, that some of the trilogies within the whole MCU seemed like the same storyline repackaged. So it's like the sequels kind of made me go, eh. It's always like the first of the 3 tended to be a little bit more enjoyable, just from just an outsider here, because it was like, oh, okay, Loki's bad. Is Loki bad or is Loki good? Or all right, it's Tony Stark is he's now grumpy again and selfish, and now he's going to find his way, and now he it just seemed like always had the same beats. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I off base? And remember, I'm the guy who will also ask dumb questions just to fire people up. So,
well, like I'm totally with you in terms of praising Empire Strikes Back, and we did a lot of that on a recent show. They didn't just try to do the same thing again, and that's to their credit. They were smart enough to realize you can't just make Star Wars again, because if you try, you're going to fail. And so this is why, and for the MCU, for Star Wars, for any series or franchise, this is a major way to kind of weigh whether they're being successful or not, is whether they're trying something new and interesting. And this is when Scott said, "Oh, Last Jedi is maybe a close second for him at this point." I nearly did a fist pump in the background because, like, I really, really appreciate the ambition in that movie. It's a different Star Wars.
Yeah, I was just gonna add. I think a lot of times, and this is sort of the part of what we discussed when we're doing our watch of Empire is you need these movies to propel the story forward. You need them. It's nice when you get the space battles or the lightsaber duels or kind of the moments that kind of tuckle wrap their arms around you, make you feel warm and fuzzy. I think Force Awakens does a great job of giving you that. But you need the counterbalance of that. You need something like Last Jedi or Empire to propel the story forward because out of those movies, out of those stories, you will get the next set of movies and ideas and events that'll just springboard into everything else that will impact the fandom. And sometimes it's almost like knowing ahead of what people are going to like before they tell you they want it.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Scott, go ahead. Am I off base on the sequel?
No. And I think it depends on which, especially when it comes to the Marvel movies, which sequels you're talking about. Because I think that later on, as they got further into the sequels, so Iron Man 2 definitely suffers from that, where it doesn't really put anything forward from Iron Man 1, except for him discovering the element that takes the arc reactor out of him. But I think with Captain America, it definitely had a better sequel than the first Captain America. I think with Guardians, it kind of levels out. It doesn't have as good a sequel, but I'm personally a bigger fan of 2, which is my unpopular opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see Thor 2, Iron Man 2, they definitely have this, what are they moving forward with? And you don't get that until everything starts getting retconned into it.
Cool. So that, I guess that is a question. So did they have, again, dumb Marvel newbie here? Did they have all these things mapped out and connected, or is it just kind of loosely connected? And then, hey, was there a lot of retconning as they went on?
They were loosely connected for the most part. They had the ideas of they were going to eventually end up in an Avengers movie. Then they were going to end up at an Age of Ultron movie, and then eventually down to in the Infinity Saga. They didn't so much say these are the things outside of that they're going to need, like how to get to those, except for a few key points.
And I think part of the dynamic that Marvel was smart about was they put in the connective tissue, in the background, so that if they did want to spring, they knew, okay, we're going to have at some point Spider-Man coming in because they were making those arrangements with Sony. They knew they're going to bring up Black Panther into the story. They knew the Guardians of the Galaxy at one point were going to be folded into the greater MCU. But they didn't necessarily run out to tell you, oh, we're going to link them all together. You could tell by the way that they were going to release the movies that at some point stuff was going to connect. But it was very rarely was it overt. More often than not, stuff in the background, stuff kind of hinted at, stuff suggested, so that if for some reason something will happen that they had to switch course and reverse stuff, they could do that and not impact the overall story thread.
Now, I will say this. It's a good thing that Brittany and I were kind of spoiled on Eliza, because even though we didn't watch the Marvel movies, we still, listen to people talk and so I think that's why when I was talking to Scott, we were texting back and forth. I said, I think Infinity War didn't have the heaviness to us as probably other people because, we knew what was coming and we knew what was coming after. So it was still a good movie, but it's a dang good thing that I knew about the Infinity Stones to begin with, because otherwise, I was your head would be kind of spinning. It's like all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, what? The Power Stone came from there, and this stone came what? Where? It's like, they have that one moment in, I suppose was it Infinity War or is it an Endgame, when they finally get the story of all the it was Endgame, right? Where they get all the stories of all the Infinity Stones. And anyway, Britt and I were doing some Googling, going, all right, where did they get all these things? Okay, so this is from Guardians. This is from, so what I'm saying is that if you take mom or dad who have never known, they don't know anything about, Marvel, they're going to be probably confused as all get out.
And that's what's interesting, that story comes in Endgame when they're trying to piece the background of where they can find them again. Because if you look at it when they're originally introduced, like the Tesseract, the Space Stone is introduced way back in Captain America, the First Avenger. But it's not made of this is an Infinity Stone and this is gonna be important and this, that, the other thing. It's important of its own sake. It's important for the story you're gonna see, and that's it. And the other good smart thing that they did is, because a lot of this is just comic book stuff that, it's real easy to, once you start stepping back, you're like, my God, there's a lot of really comic book geeky stuff all around us. They don't shove it all up in front. They're slowly introducing it bit by bit. Stuff like the Power Stone, it gets introduced in the Guardians of the Galaxy, which is where you first get the idea of the Infinity Stones. But for the moment with the Collector, and then later on the climax, that's it. It's a small story. Its impact is to the story that you're going to see, nothing else.
I think they gave themselves a lot of flexibility early on. Well, this is one of the smart things they did, was they put in a lot of Easter eggs, and then they weren't obligated to follow up on them. It was, I can pick this particular thing for us to do more with, or this other thing. And it wasn't really until the end of Thor: The Dark World where they show this thing they've been battling the whole movie. Oh, this is an Infinity Stone. What does that mean? People who haven't read the comics still don't know, but this is where they finally actually say, we're going to connect all this stuff, and we're going to make the effort to tell this particular story with Thanos. I mean, they teased him at the end of the Avengers, but again, they didn't necessarily have to follow up on that. I really think it wasn't until Thor: The Dark World when they sort of had a good idea at that point. They probably didn't have every piece of it laid out perfectly at that point, but they knew, okay, we're going to have to introduce pretty much all of these stones over the next 15 odd movies, and then we're going to let it culminate. And it was a good decision. Because again, they gave themselves all that flexibility early on. They didn't paint themselves into a corner where they had to rewrite things. I mean, obviously there's a lot of retconning going on. Like, again, we talked about it with the Space Stone being the Tesseract, being the Cosmic Cube. It's they went back and they grafted that onto the story, but they hadn't painted themselves into any corners to where they couldn't do that. And that was the smartest thing they did early on.
I think also one of the, and that goes to that idea of sometimes when you compare it to without casting aspersions towards the sequel trilogy, the idea of J.J. Abrams with the mystery box. You can build a mystery real easily, but then you've pointed it out to people. You've made it a big deal. One of the smart things Marvel did is they never made a big deal out of any one of the story elements. Whether it was, the teaser of Thanos. If you read the comic books, if you know who Thanos was, you were excited. But again, that's all it was. It was just a moment. It hinted at more without necessarily, as Dave says, locking them into saying, this is what must be told next. I think ultimately it's not until, I believe it's Age of Ultron, when he finally says, when he finally has that teaser scene of, fine, I'll do it myself, and he's putting on the gauntlet, then you finally get an idea of, okay, now he's coming. But even that still took him another 4 or 5 movies before we finally saw him in his full power on the screen.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go around the horn. Everybody's going to give their. We'll start. Do we want to start with our top or our bottom? That sounded bad. Do we want to start with our favorites or our least favorites?
Dude,
let's least favorite first. Okay, we'll end on a high note.
Least favorite first, and again, first of all, I do want to say this. I do want to throw out a couple that I was most surprised that, or 3 that I was most surprised that I enjoyed. Okay, and these are not in my top, or these are not in my top 3, but ones I was surprised at. First one was Iron Man, and the reason why is because I remember I've told this story before. My brother, for my birthday or Christmas or something, gave me Iron Man DVD, and I had no interest to see Iron Man at all, ever. It wasn't like I said I was against it. I was just like, why is my brother giving me Iron Man? What is this about? What? So I think a thing is still wrapped in my DVD cabinet. And so I kind of went in with this a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, because it's like, why did I get Iron Man? But enjoyed that movie. Really did enjoy that movie. That was one. Doctor Strange. That was one I was not expecting to enjoy as much as I did. Because I know nothing about the character Doctor Strange. I didn't read the comic books. I know I had a horrible upbringing, but really a really enjoyable movie. That and I guess I also like the character development of Doctor Strange. We're basically like, okay, well, it's another Tony Stark, but almost more arrogant, but no, just totally enjoyed that movie. And the last one I was surprised was Ant-Man. I remember seeing that advertised in a trailer when we were seeing another movie, and I was just like, ugh, what the heck? I mean, it didn't make, it just had no interest to see it, but I was doing my homework, and it was a fun movie. It was a fun movie. And Paul Rudd helps with that. He's just kind of fun. He's kind of like Vince Vaughn, where Vince Vaughn is the same person in every movie. I mean, Paul Rudd is kind of the same guy in every movie, but at least he's enjoyable. But yeah, those were 3 that, like I said, just surprised me that I enjoyed so much. I don't know.
Can I dovetail off that? Like the one movie out of all of these that surprised me in the same way was Captain America: The First Avenger. I had no interest in seeing that, and I'd seen the other Marvel movies. I saw this thing. I saw the trailers for this thing, and it's just like, gosh, this looks hokey. There's no way this is going to be good. I think we eventually ended up seeing it in a rental, and just loved it, and thought, my gosh, they made this thing work. They made this work, and like they previously made Thor work, and that was what convinced me. That was the moment where I was like, this they're onto something. They can make these different characters fit in the same universe, and I'm on board. And that was the movie.
And I was going to say, actually, the one that kind of surprised me at first was Thor, because that was always going to be the first difficult character to turn, because his world is completely fantastical. You can buy Iron Man, rich guy, genius inventor, all the resources in the world. You can buy his character and his development, no problem. In a weird way, you can buy Captain America, particularly, the idea of him as a super soldier, fighting World War II, standing up for what's right. You can buy his character. Thor is one of those characters that, again, works excellent in a comic book, but you start pulling at the threads, can be quite difficult to get. And I think what Dave says highlights one of the geniuses that Kevin Feige and Marvel have had, which is they picked the right creative force or director for the movie. So first Thor is Kenneth Branagh, and his goal is, okay, ignore all the cosmic stuff, all the magic powers, the Asgard, all that. This is a family drama set within a royal family. Boom, Shakespeare. He gets that. You get Captain America: The First Avenger. They get Joe Johnston, who did The Rocketeer. Okay, boom, this is 1940s Americana, and we're gonna give that to you this way. And I think that's one of the smart things they've done. You look at all the characters whenever they've done one of their good movies, one of the great movies, they found the right creative force and plugged it into the right character.
And their casting too is the other thing I'll add on top of that. They've just crushed it like every time out. And that's what makes this stuff work.
Even secondary, tertiary characters, it's like, wow, they got somebody who totally fits the role.
So Scott, any ones that surprised you?
I mean, you got to go Iron Man. I mean, you think about 10 years ago, nobody thought that a secondary, third, and tertiary superhero, because Iron Man, like when we think about him now, is not what he was.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was never a big superhero. And I remember watching the cartoon in the 90s and just thinking, they're doing Iron Man? Why are we doing an Iron Man movie? And I love Marvel. But then, it was everything. It just worked. Like you said, it's the fact that John Favreau has a love of this kind of nerd culture. It's the fact that Robert Downey Jr. goes through the same stuff Tony Stark did. It just worked perfectly. I didn't think that it was going to when I first saw it.
So Fredo, let's start with you. What's you go ahead and just say your top three. We won't go around.
We're doing bottom, right?
We're doing bottom first.
Bottom three. That's right. Okay, bottom three.
We're starting at the bottom.
And this doesn't mean that these movies suck. They mean that these are just not our favorites.
Start with your bottom three, and why is it Incredible Hulk?
Yeah, actually, that's one of my bottom three. So, Incredible Hulk.
I'm sorry. Disclaimer: we didn't see any of the Hulks because they weren't on my list, and
That's all right.
And I couldn't find one. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Incredible. It's interesting because you can totally tell. This is one of those things about course correction. You can totally tell that the Incredible Hulk can reconnect it towards the MCU after the success of Iron Man, because it falls immediately after, in the same summer, they film an extra pickup scene with Thunderbolt Ross with forget the name of the actor now, William Hurt, I'm sorry, and Robert Downey Jr. to connect it to the MCU. But that one, it's not that it's a bad movie. It's just it doesn't really give you much more than you've seen in other Hulk movies, which I think that one of the geniuses is they've given you the Hulk as a secondary character in just the right amount of doses. So that one's in there. I'll include Iron Man 2 because, yes, like Scott said, it doesn't really do much more than Iron Man 1 does. I mean, the casting, again, is great, whether it's, what's his name, as Justin Hammer, or even,
Well, I mean, you got Don Cheadle coming in with the line, "It's me, I'm here, get over it."
Right, the idea of recasting, going from Terrence Howard to Don Cheadle and not missing a beat. But, there's moments in there, like that whole fight in the middle of the party. It's kind of, yeah. And then I'll, of course, even though I don't think, I think it's gotten saved a bit by Endgame, I'll throw in Thor: The Dark World because I don't know, switching over from the first Thor and onto some of the craziness that Thor Ragnarok did. I think Thor: The Dark World couldn't find its footing. It was stuck in between, and you can totally tell that they were trying to do something different, but then they didn't go with Patty Jenkins as director. So, oops.
Anybody want to take issue with his bottom three?
I'll just say mine are the exact same, and for pretty much the exact same.
All right,
reason.
so we'll pass it to Scott Colby's.
I mean, yeah, the Hulk movie, it missed out on going in either direction. Like, because what I love, I'm a weirdo that loves Ang Lee's Hulk because it's so weird, but it's just so it's one of those things. It's a comic book in a movie form. Like they even do the way they do the editing and the like cross screens where you see two different things at the same time. It's a comic book in movie form. It's a terrible film, but I love it for at least attempting that. And Incredible Hulk just didn't. It seemed like a cash grab kind of movie of we have this property, let's just make it. Thor: The Dark World just has all the pacing issues that any film can ever have. And I think that you can tell Christopher Eccleston doesn't want to be there through his performance. It's like he spent all the hours in the makeup chair putting that on and just regretted signing a contract. And like I said about Iron Man 2, it like you said, it doesn't add anything except for getting Don Cheadle in there, and really that's about it. And having a Captain America Easter egg.
And Mickey Rourke acting crazy as Russian Ivan Vanko.
Yeah.
That's about, which again, it's not a bad, like I said, just Justin Hammer and Ivan Vanko are interesting villains, and the movie does not much with me with either one of them.
And I think also, like, when you look at Iron Man 2, think about Vanko's plan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's going to go to Monaco, where Tony Stark isn't racing. He does that last minute.
Mm-hmm.
How is he getting to Tony Stark outside of that? Like, if Tony Stark doesn't get in the car, this entire movie completely changes.
Right.
It's kind of funny listening to you guys talk about Dark World. And I guess this is how forgettable that movie is because I'm trying to and I only watched it maybe a week or two ago, and it's like, trying to pick up on the beats you guys were talking about. I swear to God, we watched it. So it's kind of a forgettable movie. But it's not on my bottom three. I'll share mine. And this might be, again, this is just, Ultron is one on there. And it's because for the first about 15 minutes of that movie, Brittany and I sat there looking at each other going, did we skip a movie? And I was flipping through my list that you gave me. It's like, well, did we miss something? It's like, it's like when you walk in on a conversation that's going on for 30 minutes and it started talking about, football, and now it's talking about religion, and you're trying to figure out what the heck just happened. I don't know. Now I guess I'll ask this in all seriousness. Did I miss something? It seems like it just picks up.
You didn't technically miss something. It was really fun for people who were into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Okay.
Because before that movie came out, we it's just a throwaway line in an episode, but they're like, we have this op going on there. Like they say that basically what they're doing is sending the Avengers somewhere. Now it makes absolutely no sense in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. think, or the Avengers think Coulson's dead, and that's a whole different issue in its own. But it wasn't necessary to have, I don't think there was any thing necessary to patch that over. It's just them doing an operation.
So anyway,
I was going to say creatively, it doesn't necessarily bother me when storytellers do that. They employ that technique of, we're going to skip forward so that the characters are in a different place and we can examine them at a different stage of their development, right? But you're right. That's what that movie does.
Yeah, except for that you have this whole universe that is, being sold on the fact that everything's kind of connected, even as loosely as it is. I mean, Empire Strikes Back was, 4 years after Star Wars, and we all didn't look around going, what the hell is going on here? It's not like.
But
anyway.
you know what the difference? No, but you know what the difference is. Imagine if Empire Strikes Back starts at the battle in the middle of the Battle of Hoth. That's what basically Age of Ultron did to you. They didn't give you the first 22 to 25 minutes of setup, of reintroduction to the characters, of getting to connect with where they've been, kind of grounding you, and then throwing you into the action. Age of Ultron starts in the middle of the action.
And here's another thing that, Britt and I also talked about this, that maybe we were bothered by things that others who saw this in real time, if you've had a year or two or whatever between movies rather than a day or two between movies, then maybe these things aren't as, jarring. So take everything I say with a very, very, very large grain of salt, or small, whatever. Anyway, okay, so continuing on. So Ultron was one. Iron Man 2, uh, I thought it didn't. It seemed like it was a sequel. It seemed like it was a sequel. Like I said, it's kind of the same beats. Like where okay, Tony learns all these, learns how to be a better person by the end of Iron Man, and now he's back to being. We're kind of going in this circle again. I thought that. Oh crap. Uh, the Mickey Rourke.
Mickey Rourke.
Yeah,
Mickey Rourke.
I thought that was a lost opportunity. Like it seemed like it would be a really cool villain, and they have him in a lab for fixing things for most of the time. It's like, and then after doing some reading, it sounded like he was kind of pissed about it too. From an actor standpoint, thought it was. But anyway, I just thought there was a lot of missed opportunities. And it didn't seem to propel the overall Marvel story anywhere.
No, I think that like I said, Iron Man 2 is considered Sam Rockwell playing Justin Hammer, and Mickey Rourke is playing Ivan Vanko, and they're both kind of like a dark reflection of Tony Stark and Iron Man. In terms of what he could be, what he could turn to be. But again, they don't explore much of that. None of it.
And I'm sorry, but the other thing about this is that the ultimate bad guy is in really in all aspects Syndrome from The Incredibles. Because Tony Stark, pissed him off when he was younger, and so he's been spending his whole life building up his revenge.
That's Iron Man. That's Iron Man 3.
McClunky. Okay, well, there's gonna be a lot of McClunkies in here. All right, so maybe can link all those together. Yes, you're right. Okay, so I take that back.
With the Mandarin.
That one was stupid.
Yeah, no. Which actually,
we're gonna go at that one later.
Yeah, we need to. Yeah, because there's issues there.
In my unpopular opinion, that's one of my favorites.
And because of the twist.
I didn't say that I did. Well, anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
My last one on the bottom three might be really unpopular opinion. Is Thor Ragnarok, and I think, and again, I was telling Scott this when we were texting. I said I think really I just fell victim to the hype, because when it came out, people were like, oh, Taika Waititi, and like, oh, and they're doing all these wacky things, and it's a totally different Thor movie, and I was like, so it kind of. So I was falling victim, going, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be great. And then the whole time I was thinking of that Irvin Kershner quote where he said, when he made Empire, he's like, I knew I needed humor, but not gags. And Ragnarok is filled with gags. And it's like, I don't know. It could have been, I don't know, a little bit. It just, maybe like I said, maybe it just fell victim to the hype. It was okay, but it wasn't. It's kind of like when I had a friend tell me, it's like, oh, you got to see The Hangover. It's the funniest movie since Animal House. I should have learned my lesson when everybody was like saying, oh, Ragnarok is like awesome, and I should have just tempered my expectations a little bit. But I felt let down by that movie.
You're not alone. There are. I've read a lot from a lot of people that are just. The humor doesn't work for them, and if the humor doesn't work for you, then you're going to struggle with the movie at large.
So then this is a good place for me to ask this question. This is a little bit humorous, but it's also a serious question, because I actually kind of got a little ticked off being the Star Wars fan. Not as bad as Tracy's that night when they got the trivia question thing, but so in Endgame and Fat Thor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say this. I paused it and I turned to Britt and I said, why does everybody in the world get butthurt over Luke Skywalker going to an island because he failed and he's, afraid of what might be, and like totally destroys the internet and Rian Johnson ruins Star Wars, but Fat Thor is funny and is totally, acceptable.
There were critiques. There were a lot of critiques.
So I'm one of the net nerds here then. Okay.
No. I think there was a lot of recognition that they were playing. This is difficult. They were playing a character that was clearly going through depression and had let himself go for laughs. and which is always kind of a difficult balance to try to strike because people were like, well, wait a minute, Thor is telling you he feels like he lost, and he has lost himself, his sense of who he is, etc., etc. But the moment you see him on screen, the entire audience busts out laughing, and then afterwards, everybody's making fun of him. So
yeah, you got Rocket cracking jokes, and the whole thing, the tone of it when they introduce him, it works against what they're ultimately, I think, trying to do with the character, which is like what you said. He's depressed.
Mhm.
He's going through a normal thing that a lot of people go through. And he has one of the most heartwarming exchanges later on with his mother. It breaks my heart watching that scene.
But I'm preaching to the choir here, though. But then why can't Luke Skywalker do that? With all due respect to people who've been on the podcast, with all due respect to our friends and everything, why can't Luke Skywalker go through that? Why does he have to be friggin' Superman that has no problems whatsoever for the whole thing?
Because
you.
No, actually, because the difference is the time difference between Infinity War and Endgame was 1 year. Not even that, was 11 months. The time difference between Return of the Jedi and The Last Jedi was something like 30 some odd years. So people had a lot of expectations. And that's the problem is you have an audience that expected Luke Skywalker, Jedi hero, to show up, even though The Force Awakens spent nearly 2.5 hours telling you things went bad. And if things go bad and your nephew becomes a murderous tyrant and kills all your students and destroys all your legacy, you're not just going to be like, well, let's get back on the horse. It's going to hit you. And that's what it did. But people didn't want to hear that.
Scott, you were going to say something.
Oh, no. I'm agreeing with everything. Like, people often, and I know we've had discussions about this, that Luke was a flawed character to start. He was never that bad, superhero kind of character. So, no, it doesn't make sense why people freaked out about it.
The 30 years of expectation is as good an explanation as any, maybe. But I was disappointed when I watched Endgame. I felt Thor was one of my favorite characters. I'd come to identify with him a lot. Peter was another one, and Scott was the third, and all three of them were the butt of jokes in Endgame. And that was frustrating, and I got in my feels a little bit about it at the time. But I think when you're dealing with characters that people love, it is always just tricky. It's always going to be tricky, and you're always going to piss some people off. But yeah, I mean, like all of us are in agreement. The Luke backlash. Look, I get it if you're a fan of a particular iteration like the EU, but that was Luke Skywalker to me. In The Last Jedi, like, every ideal that I had thought of him from Return of the Jedi and Empire and the original, that all came out in that movie for me.
Well, like I said, it was my Star Wars, nerdiness. Like, my hackles got up when it was like, because I've only ever heard people like laughing about Fat Thor and how we're going to have more Fat Thor, in the next Thor movie. And
here's the thing: the backlash was different, though. Like, the backlash for Luke Skywalker was he's not my hero. This isn't not my Luke kind of thing. And the backlash for Thor wasn't that he wasn't a ripped superhero anymore. It was the backlash was, why are we making fun of a person who's depressed and fat? It was two completely different backlashes.
Cool.
Fair.
So Dave, what's your bottom three?
Well, some of this is going to sound familiar, so we'll go through it fairly quickly. I agree with the Incredible Hulk being at the bottom. What's interesting, and here's where I guess I will defend these movies because it'd be more interesting to me to defend them than slag on them completely. The Incredible Hulk to me was like when it at release was like one of the top 40 comic book movies ever at the time. But there's been 100 different comic book movies that have been released since then that have just continually pushed it down the list. I think you can watch that movie and enjoy it, but there's just not a lot there beyond some action and Edward Norton.
I will say,
angst.
yeah, it's an interesting composition that Edward Norton brings to the character, completely different from Mark Ruffalo, and it kind of puts a kind of like a comparison of how would you think Edward Norton would have done in the Avengers, in Thor Ragnarok, in these other movies, because I don't see how his character would have worked as well meshing with all the other MCU characters. I think he did a good job. I just don't know it would have worked. So it's an interesting what if.
I keep a running list of like where I would rank all of these different movies. That's one of the geekiest things that I do, but I do it. And I got Incredible Hulk like 67th at this point amongst comic book movies, which feels fair. But again, like when it came out, it was nowhere near that low. It's just the bar has been raised. So I'll say that about that, and then I'll echo kind of what we've said about Iron Man 2. I like Justin Hammer. I mean, that performance is so fun, and there's a lot of cool things that they hint at. Tony Stark's battle with the bottle is a major part of his character in the comics, and they hint at it there, but they don't really go further than just hinting at it. So, I mean, I like some of the ideas there, but I don't think they took it far enough. And then my third movie, I'm going to go with, and I've thought about this a lot. There's three movies that everyone puts at the bottom: Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor: The Dark World. I think Spider-Man: Far From Home, it belongs in that group because it really doesn't do anything to advance his character from anything that we'd seen before. It's just he's Spider-Man and he's struggling, and know that he's struggling to juggle all of his responsibilities. Yeah, we know that. There's just I like the Mysterio stuff, but you were talking about Syndrome earlier. He's the most Syndrome villain of all time because he's pretending to be the good guy and I'm gonna save everybody. And so it's like,
to be fair, that's Mysterio. That's always been Mysterio.
yeah, and that's fair. Yeah, but I've seen it done. I've seen The Incredibles, and I've seen the second Incredibles movie. So it's like, okay, I mean, Mysterio technically was first, but I've seen everything in that movie before, and it felt like a rehash, and we didn't advance things. It felt unnecessary.
Let me ask you, Dave, which one do you put higher, Far From Home or Homecoming?
Homecoming.
Okay.
Much higher.
Because I find that, even though, and I always kind of think of where these movies kind of fall on the landscape, because Far From Home, I think, worked better for me because it was kind of like the chaser to the big shot that was Endgame. So it's very much more a teen comedy. It's very much more laid back. It's not as serious. So in some ways, I think Mysterio worked better for me. And kind of the idea of Peter having to deal with his emotions surrounding Tony's death. Spoiler alert, at this point. But anyway, even though I liked Homecoming when it initially came out, I find I don't go back to it as much. Even though I think Michael Keaton's performance as the Vulture is awesome. It's a great way to bring that character into the MCU. I like all the ideas that they're playing around with it when they were in the prison and whatnot. I can't wait to see Spider-Man deal with somebody like the Kingpin whenever they get the rights to that character back at some point now. But at the same time, I don't know. I find both of those movies kind of hit the same. They're like a standing single. They're not bad. They're just not. Eh.
What drove me nuts is that we did have Homecoming first, so we'd already seen that, and even with this Tony Stark tie-ins, he's the mentor that Uncle Ben was supposed to be, but wasn't, and so it was Tony instead as a surrogate. Fine. But we'd already seen that in Homecoming. And then, again, the villains were, out for some kind of vendetta against Stark, which kind of negates Peter's place in this whole thing. And I don't like that.
If I'm honest, I think the Spider-Man PlayStation game tells a far more compelling and better Spider-Man story than either one of the MCU Spider-Man movies. And I know I'm the only one who's probably played it in the group, but it is awesome. It is awesome.
All right. Well, Fredo, start us off on what your favorite three.
Okay, top three. We're getting to the top bunk. And this is going to be in no order because trying to put which one goes ahead of which one is just insane. So I'm going to put Guardians of the Galaxy 1 in my top three. It's one of those movies that I just love watching for their own sake. It's awesome. It's a lot of action. The humor hits. It's a lot of heart in it. It's the best love letter to every 80s sci-fi movie that you grew up watching as can be. I'm going to throw in Black Panther because it works so well on its own. It's a wonderful movie regarding the story it's trying to tell and the characters. It just enriches the world of Marvel a great deal. Just all the technology and all the stuff it's trying to say about colonialism and imperialism. It's again heady stuff. And then I'm gonna put Captain America. Actually, I was trying to decide between the second and the third Captain America, but I'm gonna go with Winter Soldier, just because it does such a great job of telling. Because that was one of the questions: how do you fit Captain America in 21st century world? And by God, if they didn't find a way how to fit him into the world, to our world, and it works, and it's got great, compelling performances, and it's awesome.
Cool. Anybody have anything to say, or should we just move to Scott? Let's go to Scott.
All right. So again, in sort of no order, but number three. I guess I have an order. Number three is Winter Soldier, and all the same reasons you said. It is a way to bring him into this century. It's different than anything they had done up until then as a comic book movie. It was a good way to do all that.
Can I say something real quick about it? And since you, Scott, are a cameraman, you're notorious for not liking the cinematography of Rogue One in some places. But I will say I enjoyed Winter Soldier, but one thing that drove me absolutely bonkers was their excessive use of the shake cam during the fight scenes.
Yeah, I can see that.
I was like, please let this fight scene be over soon, because I felt like I was having a seizure every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's the only movie that did that. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. So keep going.
One thing I'll say too about that is I don't, with shake cam, if you can still tell what's going on, I think that makes all the difference. And in the most of those scenes, I can still follow the action. You watch something like the Batman movies, the Chris Nolan Batman movies, you have no clue. It's it looks like two guys that could be miming with one another. You have no idea if they're actually fighting or not. So, yeah, I'll throw that in there before I let Scott react.
Yeah, and I'll I'll come back to something in this film that I absolutely love about it, but I'll leave it with one of the other ones. My second is the unpopular opinion, and it's only because it's one of my favorites, not one of the best, as I'll put it, is Iron Man 3. Now, I know the issues with Iron Man 3, of that terrible, terrible twist that should not have happened. But I think Iron Man 3 is the one that deals most with his character flaws. And that's always been my favorite part of Tony Stark and Iron Man, is what are his character flaws. And I think if you take out that twist, if that twist didn't happen, and there was actually a Mandarin, and it would have been better. And I was talking to Aaron about this through text, is I have a bias towards that movie because I love Shane Black. Like, Shane Black films are amazing to me, and him doing Iron Man 3 was everything.
What other movies has he done?
He's done the first 2 Lethal Weapons. He did Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. The only one I haven't seen so far is I haven't watched his new Predator film.
I don't know if anybody saw that.
So, go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
I was going to go into my last one, unless you had something else.
No. Go for it.
Okay. And then my last one is the big, obvious choice in the room, and that's Endgame. And Endgame, to me, I've seen all of these films since they came out. Like, every single one is important to me. And Endgame was the culmination of that. Not only the years of watching 20+ movies and TV shows and everything of that, but being a comic fan from a child. Like, it's everything I wanted a comic book movie to be. And it really, it's especially in that last hour. That last hour of, like, so I've always had this issue with Civil War. And it's the airport battle. The airport battle is one of my least favorite scenes in a Marvel film. And it's only because I know that splash page they were trying to represent in that from the Civil War comic books. And it didn't work with 12 people. But then from that moment that Captain America says, Avengers Assemble, which is, I cried when I heard him finally say it after all these years. To when they're charging, and all the way to the end where Tony says, "I am Iron Man," it's just comic book page after comic book page. It's pages coming to life. And it was what I wanted to add with Winter Soldier. The first time I felt that in any of these films was when Captain America is holding onto the helicopter. And there's not many moments in these films where I felt that it's a comic book come to life. I love them. They're great stories. But Endgame was that. It was a comic book come to life for me, especially that last hour. And it's paced perfectly, where by the time you get to that final battle, you don't realize you've sat through 2 hours of a film. And you don't even realize once it's over that you've just watched another hour of film.
Yeah,
I would agree with that, because I think I paused it because we just watched it last night, and I paused it and I said, "That's right, I forgot this is almost 3 hour movie." So I was actually quite surprised with Endgame, that thought that we were going to get a lot more Captain Marvel. But
see, I was happy we didn't, because especially when you see her in that last battle, it's clear how easily it is to write her as OP, because she is overpowered. That it shouldn't be a difficult thing for her to defeat Thanos. And if she's in it more than she is, it's really hard to go, well, why didn't we just use Marvel for this whole thing?
Sure. Like I said, the other thing I will say, that when they all start coming out of the, Doctor Strange's portals and everything, that was really powerful, and it's obviously what they're trying to get with Rise of Skywalker. But Rise of Skywalker, you just got a bunch of ships that you didn't know, but you were like, oh, and there's Groot, and oh, there's those guys, no, they're the so you're excited that these, all these people were back. So
It's funny that you say that, Aaron, because and you can go look up YouTube. That weekend when that movie premiered, that moment was the moment that everybody was putting theater reactions to, like everybody cheering in India, in China, in Brazil. Like the moment when all those portals opened up, everybody just standing up and clapping and losing their minds like it's a concert. You're like, it's a movie, but that goes to the job that Marvel did of building these characters.
Well, the big moment I saw the reaction for was um, no, it's not a podcast if Dave Glado doesn't leave the meeting. But no, the reaction I saw was when Captain America catches Thor's hammer.
When he lifts the hammer. Because again, I see, and that's a good example. It's hinted at in Age of Ultron.
Mm-hmm. Never
comes up again up until that moment. So if you didn't see Age of Ultron, you didn't miss anything. That's no major bearing on the story. But if you saw it, you go like, oh, that's cool. We always, you can connect those two moments together.
And one thing, and this will sound weird coming from me because you guys know me at least, and my ranting about fan service for fan service sake. This movie is a 3-hour fan service, and it's done absolutely right. Like, there is no point where you're watching any of the fan service moments where you're like, oh, that was obviously because of this. Like even things like the elevator scene. Obviously, the elevator scene is a callback, and it has that little fan service moment of Hail Hydra, and it's just like that's an amazing, that's a perfect moment for that.
Or America says.
But you don't need to have read that comic where Captain America says Hail Hydra to understand what that moment is to people who read the comic books. Like, it doesn't take away from it. Like, I've always said about Rogue One, seeing the two guys from Tatooine on that planet it serves no purpose to a story. And it's just throwing it in there because you can. And I didn't feel like there were any moments in Endgame really that we're just throwing this in because we can. Maybe Howard the Duck, but that's about it.
It's the ultimate fan service movie, like you said. I mean, it's the ultimate. And fan service is not a dirty word, and people shouldn't treat it as if it is, because if it's done well, it can serve the story and just be enormously entertaining.
But I also think that particularly because they left it for this movie, which is that's the thing. That's also part of the reason why you couldn't just have Captain Marvel be as big an influence in this movie, because this is the send-off for the original Avengers. That's why they're the ones who survived the snap. That's why they're the ones who are intricately involved in the time heist. That's why they all got to be there for the end. So this is the end of their story in a way. Yes, Thor will have other movies. Yes, we might see Hawkeye in his TV show. But it's going to be different, and Hulk will be appearing here and there. But it's going to be a different kind of world where it's going to be more Black Panther and Captain Marvel and Spider-Man in the foreground, and Doctor Strange, I guess. But it's that idea of we're going to give you a 3-hour rousing parade to how awesome everything has all been, and you want to come along for the ride because you've been riding with us since 2008. So come along.
So my top three were, and the first two I'll kind of link together because kind of for the same reasoning. It was Black Panther and Captain Marvel, and the reason why those two, like I said, I'm lumping those together, is I absolutely loved the character interactions throughout both those movies. I thought Nick Fury and Captain Marvel were just those two. There was obvious personal chemistry between that. They, you could tell that they got along. But just the way they wrote all the characters, like I said, both Black Panther and Captain Marvel, they're good stories. They're just fun movies, and you really it didn't seem like there were any throwaway characters really either. Um, but the other one that I'll put in there that was kind of surprising is I'll actually put Infinity War. Infinity War is kind of the Empire Strikes Back of this whole thing. I mean, and it was, even though, like I said, some of it was kind of, some of it was kind of lost because I was kind of spoiled, and knew what was coming and stuff like that. But it also seemed like it was the most purposeful of all of the movies. It's like, okay, everything that you've gone through has led you here, and then to have everything go wrong, um, I thought it was just a really compelling story. Thought it was, Endgame. I will say there was it. I know it's kind of. I thought it at the time, and then I was watching some reactions, and other people were saying this as well. It's a little too Back to the Future 2-ish at times,
They even
where,
reference it.
yeah, they even reference it, right? So I mean, but like I said, it was still a great movie. Still really enjoyed it, but it was, I thought Infinity War had a more compelling story. Um, but it's interesting though, in a symphony, when you play, usually um, the the third movement, your final movement in a symphony, um, is usually the most fun to play because it's calling back. You get the recapitulation. You're calling back all the themes. It's usually the one that kicks butt the most, and it's loud and it's just energetic, and you just brah at the end. That's Endgame. The second movement is usually the one where um, it's the composer starts screwing with things. It's a little, you have to really be focused when you're playing this movement. It doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. And it's usually what audiences don't really like to listen to the most unless you're really geeky about it. So I guess, like I said, from a musical standpoint, this kind of made sense to me. And so that's why I don't criticize Endgame, because it was the finale. That's what the finale is supposed to be, end on a major key and a major chord, and rah at the end. But like I said, Infinity War was just far more interesting, I would say. So those are my three.
Well, Aaron, go back if I go back to what you've said before about the Avengers movies, when you were in the midst of doing this experiment, you said, the Avengers movies aren't really working for me as well as the smaller character pieces, because why are they not getting along? It feels like a regression. And we talked about that. And for Infinity War, it all makes sense. It makes sense because you have to separate the characters for them to lose, for there to be tension, for it to be, the possibility that they don't actually win at the end of the day.
Yeah, but you don't need 3 Avengers movies where they're always yelling at each other. You could probably done it in 1 or 2.
Yes, and I agree with you. And then that's why I feel like Infinity War works as well as it does, because you have the events of Civil War that are still lingering over everything, and they're not together, and they're divided, and that's why they lose. And you can see that it's going to happen. It's written on the wall, but it's still really interesting to see it unfold.
By the way, and you all know my wife, Brittany's favorite moment in probably any Marvel movie was in Endgame when they said to Captain Marvel, "Do you need any help?" And they said, "No, she's got backup." And that's when all the female characters were there, and Britt was jumping off the couch, fist pumping. She was fired up. So it was a very cool
moment.
That was
a great moment. That was one of my favorite moments.
Yeah.
It's seeing that on release day, I was like, this is the moment I know I'm going to have to yell at people about, because they're not going to understand. It's not for them.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's not for the, live in their parents' basement people who will argue against representation. It's for the people who want that representation. And I mean, fan servicey, but again, it works. It works. And I loved it.
it was also, we've talked about, Ray has done, the character of Ray has done so much for Star Wars to give, little, young girls, like to have their Star Wars character. We had Princess Leia, but, she was always kind of more of a politician than, a warrior, which Ray was more of a warrior. Um, but here it was like Marvel was saying, see, girls, we got all these characters for you.
Right.
You've seen them spread out in these movies, but here they all are, and yeah, it was powerful.
Mhm. No, and I think first of all, going back to what you were saying about Infinity War, it pulls a neat trick where it makes the villain the protagonist. It's because Thanos is the one going through the character arc. He's the one who's got to suffer, and he's the one who's got to sacrifice in order to achieve his goal. But also,
Well, and I'm sorry, he's relatable as well in a sick way, because how many of us are like going, "Ugh, it's just too many tourists in this town. Wish they'd all just go home."
Mhm.
Right? I mean,
Right.
we've all had that "get off my lawn," kind of feeling, and that's yeah.
Yeah, and in some ways, it would have been easy to play him because if you look at the comic Thanos, he's very much more a megalomaniac. He's
Mhm.
much more the sneering, over the top, death worshipping villain. And what this goes to some of the genius that the writing and creative forces within the MCU have done is they haven't just simply lifted from the comic book and dropped right into a movie. They've assessed the characters and the stories they want to tell and made sure that they fit. So in this case, yeah, Thanos is going to be the big bad villain. I always remember leading up to Infinity War, everybody knew we were going to get that snap because that was in one of the first issues of the Infinity Gauntlet saga. So I went, okay, we're going to get a snap. So who's going to die? And that was a point of discussion leading all the way up to that movie's release because it's the Chekhov's gun. You set it up, it's going to happen.
By the way,
Uh,
y'all saw what when Endgame came or Infinity War came out. You saw what Google did with
mhm,
their Google Doodle. They made you could snap the gauntlet and your search results would disappear.
mhm,
Yeah, if
mhm.
somebody got paid good money to do that, how would you like to have that job at Google?
Uh,
Anyway,
that's a lot of code. No thanks. But but I think they recognize because that was one of the charges against Marvel at the start was the weakness of their villains, and it's not that they were weak, it's that the quality of their leading characters were so strong that you knew they were going to win. I mean, even on top of it being a comic book movie, you wanted them to win. You liked Tony Stark, you liked Steve Rogers, you liked Thor. So the only villain that kind of approached him was Loki, which was why it made sense that he had to be the villain in the first Avengers. But they suffer through some secondary villain issues up until you get to later on to characters like Killmonger and characters like Thanos.
So, Aaron, I also don't want to undersell your other two choices,
Hmm.
especially because they're very socially important movies.
Hmm.
And that may not have anything to do with why you might have picked them.
well, it had
Um,
a lot to do with why I picked him as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
It just like again, we talked about representation. That's critical, but there's also just this idea of moving the goalposts further down the field and making progress as a society, and telling these stories and doing it well. Not just saying, "Oh, yay feminism," or "Yay representation." Telling a coherent story at the same time. I think like those are important movies. They just are. And I really appreciate that they both made your list. They're both in my top 10
Hmm.
as well.
No, and I was going to say, and recognizing that they needed to get, like for Black Panther, they went and got Ryan Coogler, who immediately set a vision for not just the character, how they wanted to tell him, but how to make sure that it was authentic to his experiences, both in Wakanda and in the greater world. So it never, that's the difficulty with a lot of these movies. It can be very easy to come off as cheesy, if not offensive. That's one of the reasons why they unfortunately made the switch with Iron Man 3, with the Mandarin, because
Yeah.
that's a character that's created from the 1960s, from a different era. That if you try to transpose him to today, good luck. It may work out, it may not. It all depends on how you try to do it. So they just made the easy choice to not even consider bringing him.
But that's the thing, is that now it's the fact that, especially now that they are considering bringing him in, it's I just thought that was a wasted opportunity, because they didn't inherently, like, Ben Kingsley's performance did not come off up until that moment where he's like, "Oh, I'm Trevor," and it's like everything up until then was fantastically done,
Mm-hmm.
and then it just, why?
But in some ways, that twist, I was laughing when it finally dawned on me what they did, and I went, "That is brilliant. That is perfect." It says a lot about, modern geopolitics, that you can create a boogeyman on the level of the Mandarin and have people believe that it's real, and make him a threat for even somebody like Tony Stark. But at the same time, then you go like, no, that's not really the threat. At the same time, I'll say, I don't know if you saw any of the extra features or whatever in the movies. They have hinted in the MCU that there's a real Mandarin out there. So
yeah, they're putting him in, what's it called?
Shang-Chi?
Yeah.
Shang-Chi, yeah, okay. So, but you see, I think it may work better there than it would have done in Iron Man 3. I don't know.
It also shows a studio that's a lot more confident at this point. They know they can do it.
So, Dave, what's your top three?
All right. Well, some of this is familiar ground, so I'm going to actually just not list my top three. I'm going to go ahead and put Ragnarok in here, which is technically fourth for me, but I wanted to talk about it. I love what they do in this movie in terms of its political commentary. Again, we talked about how the humor may work for you, it may not work for you. Similarly, the action may or may not work for you. It's very CGI heavy and fantastical. They're out it's Jack Kirby, right? We're out in space, and there are all these vibrant, crazy colors, and the set design is wacky, and you got Jeff Goldblum in this movie, and there's just like a whole lot of stuff to just like
You're hitting all the things that just annoyed the crap out of me.
All this stuff is gonna. That's my point. Like it's not gonna work for everybody. It's just not. But we talked about colonialism in Black Panther. There's colonialism in this movie, and they just talk about the cost of war, the cost of subjugating other peoples, and I thought it was very tastefully done, which is fascinating because you've got this kind of wacky, kooky director, with this gag-filled movie, and underneath all of that, you have this, important message.
Yeah, the idea of legacy, the idea of the fact that Asgard is built atop of the wars and the conquests and the plunder that they all took part in, and that in order to in order to save the people of Asgard, you got to let all that go.
And I like the character growth too of Thor and Loki in particular. It's very self-aware. That scene where Thor talks to Loki about, you're going to betray me after I trust you. And, these are, this is where we are, and life's about growth, brother, and like, I just loved that because it really crystallized their relationship, and it showed you that, yes, they do have to move forward and there has to be growth. And then Loki comes through, and he does. And that's what makes his end eventually tragic.
And then they do get help.
Yeah. But it worked for me in every way it could have. An Immigrant Song, man. I mean, Immigrant Song, come on. So
I will say I'll say one last thing.
Yeah.
That movie made me worried about Taika Waititi doing a Star Wars movie. I've seen Taika direct, 20 minutes of Mandalorian, and that was fine. But I get what you're saying about the messages, but when it's like having the world's best rock band on stage, but then having inflatable animals and a laser show and everything. I'm not that sounds like Pink Floyd now, but anyway, you know what I mean. It's like, but like having all of a sudden Muppets running around on stage, and it's like what you're distracting.
Stonehenge.
You're distracting me with all the bells and whistles, and Dave, when you mentioned colonialism, I went to Britt and I said Dave was talking about how he likes the message about colonialism. We both went, maybe we need to go watch this movie again, because that was not apparent just from the get-go.
I will say, watch Jojo Rabbit if you have any apprehensions about Taika Waititi. He comes off as somebody who's very funny and laid back and nonchalant, but he can get to some serious messages when he wants to. It's just he's very cognizant of the medium he's in. And I think to Dave's point regarding Thor Ragnarok, look at the track record. I mean, because he is paying off a lot of the stuff that got built in the first two Thor movies, namely the relationships between Loki and Thor, but also the sheer gumption to go, you know what? We did the Shakespearean thing in Thor 1, worked. We tried to repeat it in the Dark World, it didn't work. We have to go a whole different way here, and finding a way to connect with audiences in a way I don't think any of the other Thor movies have done.
But to your point, Dave, Immigrant Song, yes, I will say this, Marvel knows how to use music.
Mm-hmm.
At least, not necessarily composed music, in like the symphonic score type of way, but, from just their use of, rock music throughout, that was good. So anyway, all right, so I'm done poo-pooing on one of your favorites there.
So that's one. We need two more.
Number 2 for me, I'll go Avengers, the original one.
Mm-hmm.
I love Endgame. I love Infinity War. I don't even hate Age of Ultron, but all of those movies for me require prior knowledge of this universe. You have to have seen some of the other movies or read some of the comics to kind of get it. And the Avengers was just this magnificent crossover event that we didn't even know could happen. It had never been done before at this level, and I know that a lot of people have some critiques over pacing and how some of the characters are portrayed, etc. But that last hour of that movie was just it made me feel like I was 9 years old again, sitting in a movie theater, and just magical. So I wanted to include that one. And then my top choice, and it's been my top choice, for nearly a decade now, Guardians of the Galaxy. It just, well, Aaron, you were just talking about the music. Obviously, they crush it in that regard. The casting was perfect. The character dynamics are perfect. The whole space western, Star Wars influence, I love the humor works for me. But the thing I always come back to with that movie, for me, it gets me the most emotional of any of the Marvel movies. And it's that callback from the very beginning of the movie to the very end of the movie when she says, "Take my hand." And that just kills me every time. And it's such a simple idea, but it's executed flawlessly. And I mean, that's what that story is. It's about finding healing and finding your family when, you're coming from this place of damage and wreckage. And it's just inspiring for me. And it will always be my favorite.
And then you get Guardians 2 with the most ridiculous end fight scene on the planet. That whole thing with Kurt Russell was just.
But that's what I love about it. It's so ridiculous.
It's awful.
It's just so over the top, though, and that's what I like about a Guardians of the Galaxy kind of thing, is that it is just so fantastic. They even in the first one, they go to a place that is a celestial skull.
Right. Again, those are all those Jack Kirby influences where you can totally tell either he was on doing something or he was on something at the time. But actually, to Guardians 2, I find that the ending of Guardians 2 somehow has even more emotion than Guardians 1, just from the way of the Yondu sacrificing himself for Peter, and then afterwards the message he has regarding pushing, how you may try to push people away, but if they'll try to be there for you, etc. It's interesting. They find good ways to mix in very strong emotions in very silly movies.
Oh, and I didn't mind Guardians being silly at all. I like Guardians 1. I was and Guardians 2. I was in until the last fight. And I was just like, oh, good
Yeah,
Lord.
when Pac-Man showed up.
Oh yeah.
When Pac-Man.
That's just it again, and I always go back to the point with those characters because it's interesting. I mean, you missed out, but when Infinity War came out and all of the internet turns against Chris Pratt's Star-Lord for helping to lead to the snap by accident, and you tend to forget that his character is one that's not necessarily a stunted adolescence, but he's still very much not taking things seriously, and it's the growth of his losses and the growth that he goes by, forming the Guardians that kind of leads him to a better place. But that threat's always in the back of his head that he could always revert back. But
I mean, forget about even that. Like, people weren't paying attention to time, like where that was in the movie. That's after Doctor Strange is gone. There is one way to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Like, we know at that point if they're going to win, they have one way, and it involves Chris Pratt's character throwing a fit.
Yeah, did you catch that, Aaron, on first viewing? Because it took me, I don't know, maybe a half hour after the movie had ended of just like reflecting and thinking about it to realize that Doctor Strange had seen the outcome and had known this is the only way.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. It took a lot of the internet a while to get to that point.
Right. Yeah, because they were mad with him. And what's interesting, they were mad with him because Spider-Man died. They were mad with him because all those characters out. It was interesting to see people just turn on a character that they like. They just
yeah, it's amazing. A lot of them were like, they could have ended this here. And it's like, no. Doctor Strange laid it out. They could not have ended that here.
So and they even go back and go like, when he goes one in Endgame, it's like he's telling Tony Stark, "This is it."
So let's back you all up because they did this before. I remember the conversation Britt and I had during Civil War was again we paused it and I said, so basically they're making me hate characters that I've grown to love now, because it's like. You were picking a side really at one point, in Civil War, and it's like, it's kind of like, I don't know. I was getting mad at characters that previously I'd really enjoyed, and I mean, yeah, it was well done that way. So I thought Civil War was cool that way.
The genius of Marvel's golden age, so to speak, when Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby and all the other guys who created these characters back in the early 60s is they went, we're not going to give you heroes. We're not going to give you a fully formed Superman or a fully formed Batman or Wonder Woman who makes the right decision every time. We're going to give you human characters that have powers that choose to do good. And therefore, that means they screw up. That means they make mistakes. That means they get mad and lash out and act in negative ways. That's been the brilliance of those characters because they said you'll connect with them because they're like you. And one of the things that, like whether it was Tony Stark's alcoholism or in some ways the depression that Thor falls into, or in this case in Civil War, which is one of those movies that again was almost may have been number 4 on my list because it's interesting. There's all the heady ideas at the top, but what ultimately splits them is the fact that they cannot come together as a family on an emotional level because of the secrets that they're keeping from one another. That's what tears them apart. It's not the Sokovia Accords. It's, Bucky killed Howard Stark and his wife, and Tony will not let that go. Can't let that go.
Oh, cool. Well, way to bring that conversation to an end. Fredo wins.
Well, Aaron, are you gonna stay with it? Or, we've got Black Widow coming out whenever, God knows whenever, this fall, I guess. Are you gonna stick with it? Are you gonna keep watching them?
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, it's we'd already been, like I said, we'd seen Guardians and Black Panther and Captain Marvel. We were not anti-Marvel, it's just, so yeah, no, absolutely. It's a little bummed. I wish Hawkeye would have been sacrificed in Black Widow for the Soul Stone, but
that's going to be interesting discussing the Black Widow movie whenever it comes out, because it's an interesting choice they made, because they could have gone either one. And I think in so many ways people thought, well, Hawkeye's the easy choice. He's the one he's popular. We got plenty of dudes. We only have one girl in the original set, so sacrifice Hawkeye. Plus, he's the guy who's behaving the most suicidal in the story. So if he sacrifices himself for the greater good, so be it. But
it wouldn't have had the emotional impact it did had it. Like, if we're all like, okay, Hawkeye, you can go do your thing in fall. We need a Black Widow. Like, it wouldn't have had that hit that moment did in that movie.
A lot of people were upset that it was Black Widow who got fridged, the only female character from the original group. And, ultimately Tony dies as well. But, yeah, I tend to agree with you, Scott. That was a more emotional sacrifice than Hawkeye could have provided, because Hawkeye's always been kind of a periphery character.
So this is almost perfect now. So to bring this kind of to an end, I'm going to share this. Maybe you guys have seen this. Share a Chrome tab here. SNL did an Avengers thing. This is called Hawkeye Disappoints the Avengers. And let me hit play.
Director Fury, we're in trouble. The Chitauri are invading Earth through the portal Loki opened with the Tesseract.
In English, woman!
Aliens are attacking New York City!
Then it's time to assemble the Avengers!
You mean your super team?
No, they are so much more than that. A super soldier, a monster, a god, an archer.
Wait, an archer?
Yeah, like a bow and arrow dude.
Like super arrows?
Nah, no more arrows. I mean, he's just really, really good at it. They're all we have left.
Great shot, Hawkeye. All right, listen up. The portal is open. Stark, I want you to get up there and take him out.
Take him out? Like on a date? You got quipped.
Thor, it's yours to light him up.
God's gone. Does anyone have scrunchie?
Black Widow, get ready.
I was born ready.
And Hulk.
Yeah, Hulk smash! I know.
Great. Now, Hawkeye, it's time to do your thing.
I'm out of arrows.
What?
I'm all out of arrows. I don't have any more. So, I guess I'm done, right? All right, I'll be in the car. Stay safe.
No, wait, no, Hawkeye, wait, you're leaving?
Yeah, I mean, I need my arrows. It's kind of my thing, right? You guys got this.
How many arrows did you bring?
All of them, like 11.
11?
11, there are 100,000 aliens out there.
And I killed 11 of them. You're welcome. My arrow thing only holds 11. 12 if I really cram them in there, but it's not safe. Anyway, good luck.
Keep fighting, brother. Hit them with your bow if you must.
Hit them with my bow? It's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Use your brain, Point Break.
Hulk feel like he's doing all the fighting right now.
Why is the big guy giving me such a hard time? Hey, what about Black Widow? She doesn't do much either.
Did someone say my name? That was hard.
Never mind, I see why you keep her around.
Guys, I've got a plan. There we go. All right. All right, here's what we do. We can shut down the generator. Okay, all we need is a direct hit through an arrow-sized core. All right, just a little tiny hole. So take the shot, Hawkeye.
He's out of arrows.
Oh, come on, Hunger Games. What are you doing? Just pull arrows out of the aliens you already shot, Katniss.
It's not sanitary.
Okay.
Hulk find arrow.
Oh, nice. Thanks, Hulk. Pat it up, baby. Ah! Damn! My fingers! I think I jammed my bow pulling fingers. Damn! Today's just not my day, guys.
Hawkeye.
You wanna give it a go?
No, why would I need that? I have a shield.
Look, I'm sorry, guys. I wish I could have been more help.
Maybe you can. Hulk, grab it.
What do you mean? I can't. What? Oh!
Great work, Hawkeye.
Couldn't have done it without you. Couldn't have done it without me.
Yes, we could have.
So yeah, that was almost too good.
And getting Jeremy Renner to make fun of his own characters always kind of fun.
He's
So-
getting his own TV show, so we'll see where that goes.
Well, with that, any final Marvel thoughts? Anything you've been wanting to say or yell at me about, or
I will say, 'cause now that you've seen him, now that you've seen the whole thing, look at what everybody else has tried to do and failed. And I think it's important for everybody to always recognize it's not this easy. We're talking about our bottom movies, and even then we're quantifying like they're not bad. They're not as good as some of the other ones, or they don't reach the levels of some of the other ones. But it's amazing to think how everybody in Hollywood for the last decade plus has been chasing after this model and failed. Whether it's Universal's Monsters universe that failed, or Warner Brothers with the DC movies that didn't quite get off the ground, when they try to cram them all together. So it looks easy until you try to do it.
oh yeah, and we see that. I've been very vocal on this podcast about the sequel trilogy. That the thing they really failed at was planning an overall story. Even if they just had loosely connected lines like we talked about earlier, that was not the case in the sequel trilogy for Star Wars. So hopefully they'll, future trilogies, they'll get that figured out. But anyway, well, cool. Well, how's everybody got their tropical storm snacks and everything ready to go?
May need some more beer. That's about the only thing.
I just picked some up today. Yeah.
Need a Topo Chico run.
And by the way, I found Margaret Orr on Twitter. So she got praised for pronouncing Cristobal correct. So I posted the tweet in our little Twitter channel there. So I thought that was kind of funny. But way to go, Margaret Orr. But yeah, all right. Well, everybody stay safe and and avoid all the plagues. So and until then, what's that?
Please don't flood.
Yeah, please don't flood. That's right. So, but cool. Until then, we'll say who dat.
Who dat?
We won't make Scott say who dat. That's okay.
I'll say bear down. How about that?
There you go. There you go.
Who dat?
We'll take it easy. Everybody have a good week. We'll see you. Oh, I'm sorry. I should say you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, on Facebook and Twitter. And all of us are on Twitter. I'm at Aaron Swoboda, Aaron _ Swoboda. Dave, Fredo, Scott, what are your guys' Twitter handles so people can find you?
At Dave Glado.
At Nola_Fredo.
At Scott Colsby.
So Dave and Scott and I have apparently got our Twitter handle for business purposes to start with, and so anyway, cool. Well, everybody have a good week, and we'll see you next week on the Who Dat Podcast.
Who Dat Jedi Podcast.
Who Dat Jedi Podcast, yes.
McConkey.